think most days I flux between waking up and just weeping, just uncontrollably. And then I come back and feel sometimes hopeful, and sometimes hopeful that um, this emotion, this momentum, this movement will give the country of my birth a chance to really live into um, the promises, right? I think one of the things that is just intoxicating about the American story and the American um, dream is that there are few other organizations and civilizations like it, right? Like the opportunity that you get to pursue, right? Life, liberty, and happiness, right? Who else is going to give you that shot, right? And that is what the country offers, at least on paper. But we all know that that is not a reality. And I think that that distance, Dave, for me, is low level, but very much traumatizing on a daily basis, right? Thinking about like, how will I navigate a public health crisis, right? A societal crisis, and then also take care of myself and the people that I love and am in charge of, right? There's a lot that I have on my mind every single day. And every Black person has had that on their mind since, 1619, right? In some way or another. And to be candid, this is the best it's ever been for Black folks, right? And I think that is a sobering thought to think about, right? And really challenges this idea of like, it's 2020. I thought things would be different. Like, no. There's never been a disruption of relentless persecution. So I go from that to being super hopeful, because when I'm at the marches, it's young 16 to 24-year-olds who are passionate, who care, who have, right? You got to remember, these kids grew up or were born around 2001, 9/11, right? A similar moment that marks a lot of our lives, right? They go through elementary and middle school with a rash of school shootings, Sandy Hook and all these other school shootings, right? And then Obama comes to the presidency in 2008, right? And they sort of keep moving along. And then the whole time you still have the shootings of unarmed Black men by the state, and you still have school shootings, right? And then they watch their parents go through the crisis of 2007, 2009. And then Trump comes into office, and sort of big destabilizing forces have been a part of their whole life. And the kids that I'm marching with and are with, they're like, look, it's over, it's done. We're not doing this anymore. And they give me energy, they give me life, because they have a level of commitment that energizes me. So short answers, 10 out of 10, 0 out of 10, cry most mornings, take a walk around the block, and then develop a plan for the day. So my first time, and we're gonna be raw here because that's why we're here. The first time I can remember explicitly being encountering racism, I was playing basketball. I was probably like 6 or 7, playing in my backyard, playing with a bunch of Hispanic guys. Car rolls by, says, "You fucking nigger, go da 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 da," and then I'm like turning around, being like, "Oh, okay, cool. Like, what does that mean?" And then we all stop, and they all looked at me and said, like, "Hey, like, that's you, buddy." Like, and then they kind of turned on me and were sort of using that word and sort of rubbing it in a way. And I went in the house and be like, "Mom, this thing happened. How do I explain it?" And then, right, just like every other African American family in this country, and frankly across the world, she had to sit me down and explain this whole really messed up system and give me some tools to navigate it. So it's been there since I've can remember. I can tell you story after story of going through schools and college and university and all sorts of places where, yeah, I mean, you can never get away from it, and the threat is always there. And I think, to answer the second part of your question, Eamon, I think that loss of innocence, the loss of innocence for Black boys in particular, comes earlier than we expect. than we suspect, right? So I can clearly remember just being a knucklehead kid, just like a mischievous kid who was like, there's a cookie in the cookie jar. Like, I have to take it. Like, this has nothing to do with me being short or athletic or this or that. It's just like, I have to take that cookie. But having taken that cookie, right, a choice that every kid would make, there's a disproportionate punishment to that action, right? Where most parents would sit down and sort of talk about, or most teachers would sit down and talk with you about why that isn't going to work and that's not a productive choice. There are both systematic punishments and then also individual punishments that take that kid mistake further than it should go, in my opinion. Caveat to that, from my perspective, the labels of black, white, inward, all those things were foisted upon a group of people as an explicit way of dividing folks, right? And you see this in another but differently charged episode of those of you who've studied Spanish, right? At some point, clearly, in your Spanish class, your teacher said, hey, we either use the vosotros from Spain or we don't use the vosotros from Spain. What happened is, quick history lesson, is that conquistadors understood the power of language, and they came to the indigenous folks in the New World and said, you all cannot use vosotros. Vosotros is this tense that says we are a part of each other, right? So intentionally, they used their language to create distance. So that they knew the power of creating distance as one of the first steps towards dehumanizing folks. You see this pattern across every sort of frankly, human interaction, right? When you look at like Friday night football across most of the American South, right? There's a lot of rhetoric of us versus them. We don't talk to them. We don't do this. We don't do that. And that linguistic distance is one of the first steps towards doing that. So when you come to the term African American and Black, this and that, currently my understanding is that, and I use Black as more inclusive because you have so many people with brown skin who come from Haiti, Jamaica, the Cape Verde. There are a bunch of different experiences where you can be Black and American and not necessarily African American. So you would quite literally be misnaming somebody or quite literally erasing a piece of their identity to call a person who does not identify as African American when they come from Jamaica or Trinidad or Haiti or whatever. So I hope that answers that. In terms of education and what happens in the classroom, the responsibility for classroom design falls squarely on the teacher, right? And the way in which students interact with both their teacher and their peers is the responsibility of the adult in the room. And that is that person's responsibility to design not only a course of physical experience, but also a curriculum that does not put 14 and 15-year-olds, 17 and 18-year-olds, 19 and 20-year-olds in positions where they have to defend their existence in front of their peers while also trying to navigate all of the social demands of, who's going to go to what party and or prom, and then also trying to navigate, I actually want an A out of this class, and then also trying to navigate, how do I pay for this? How do I, navigate the system without big time debt? So that is at least three things that every student is managing and wrestling with. And I think it's our responsibility. And I think one, you have to be incredibly thoughtful and careful and map out, actually put down how many people of color do I have in my curriculum? How many Black voices are in my curriculum? How many Black women are in my curriculum? How many queer voices are speaking to my students? Do my students know that the books they're reading are written by a trans woman who's African American, right? Because when you pick up a book from a kid's perspective, right, it just looks like a book. There's unless it's on the cover, that's not necessarily known who the writer is. Is that explicitly made known to the students? So that's one way where at a predominantly white institution, for people of color to have another face, although not in the room in the human sense, have another face that looks like them step into the classroom and speak powerful words, that takes some of the onus off of them to have to both learn, be social, get an A, and pay for it, right? That's a lot of challenges that you're having to do. And then I think the second part of your question that I would challenge you and other educators is one, why do we have to look to them to carry the load, right? And where are we making that nearly impossible for them to do that? And I'll give you a very specific example. I've had several conversations with white colleagues about the book To Kill a Mockingbird, right? A book that I imagine a lot of people in this chat have read and have very strong affinity for. That is a very problematic book for me, not only because of the language in that book, but an older white woman from the South writes an enduring narrative about a Black experience that, one, she just quite literally has not experienced, two, has understood and reshaped second, maybe third hand. And then three, it's just, if we're gonna pick a book to talk about race, To Kill a Mockingbird is not the best book. If we're gonna pick a book to talk about social injustice, To Kill a Mockingbird is not the best book. If we're gonna pick a book to talk about the legal system and the flaws in the legal system, it's not the best one. And for darn sure, if we're talking about a book of coming of age, also not the best book. So you have to ask the hard question, why do you feel so strongly about keeping this book when arguably and objectively it doesn't meet any of those criteria, right? And then it's really problematic for a white person at the front of the room to give permission to everybody else in the room to say a word that quite literally when they step out of that room, they're not allowed to say, right? We're putting a loaded weapon in kids' hands and being like, yeah, go for it, you're good. Like in my class, it's safe. It's not safe. It's not safe, right? And then we are surprised when kids step out of the classroom and then there's conflict. So I think big picture, it's our responsibility to design it with everybody in mind.